The following experience description was written in 2004. I have to begin my account by pointing out that it is not possible to convey the richness of my near-death experience with words. It's a bit like trying to depict a magnificent sunset by drawing it in the sand with a stick. My memory of it hasn't faded much, if at all, over 30 years. Although it was probably brought about by an overdose of drugs, it was nothing like a hallucination. I knew it had not been any sort of dream. In fact, it was far more real than normal waking consciousness. This aspect is so hard to explain. I was left with the certainty that a much greater reality exists beyond this one. I had seen it, been in it. What had happened to me was real, I mean really real, as if normal life is just an illusion in which we are immersed for our time here. Since the advent of virtual reality, I have found that is a good way to think of this existence. This reality is a wondrous, awesome creation, and it has purpose, but an immensely greater reality exists. After 5 days of hard drugs and little food or sleep, I had made my way to bed and collapsed there, totally out of it. I did not find myself looking down on my body, as reported in some near-death experiences, but then, it was the middle of the night in a pitch-dark room. I became aware that I was somehow apart from my body, and I remembered with surprise and wonder that I had known this feeling before. It had been before my life began, before I was born. I could feel my real self, and I recognized that I was the same self then as now. This was joyous. Then I was looking down on my entire life and seeing how unimportant all the big hassles were. I could see life as though it were a game I had been playing. I could see how all the moves were just parts of the game. Another way to describe this is the feeling you have when you have been engrossed in a really good book for hours, and then you put the book aside and notice the world around you. You take a deep breath and the real world imposes itself on you, even as you continue reflecting on what you have been reading. Well, life is sort of like the story in the book, and, having put it aside, I could see and reflect on life from the perspective of a higher, more real, reality. I could see every part of my life, every event and incident all at once. Although it seemed instantaneous, I knew that every moment was there. These days, I might say that I downloaded my whole hard drive. At the time, I think I tried to compare it to a replay of a cassette tape in fast forward. I came to understand that so much of what we think is important, is actually trivial, or of no consequence. We take ourselves much too seriously. Then I was traveling down a tunnel. It didn't open up before me, or draw me into it. I was just in it, and really moving. I'm not sure how big it was. It seemed just big enough for me to travel through it. Although I felt like I was weightless, and falling, there was no sense of up or down, just along. The tunnel was mostly dark, but I could sense the sides of it rushing past. I was facing forward the whole way through, if you can be said to face in any particular way without a body. The practical part of me was looking ahead for obstacles. The rest of me was thrilled by this exhilarating ride. I tried to reach out to touch the sides, but I didn't have hands. Well, not hands that I could use as brakes anyway, and yet I still had the form of my body. I felt like laughing at that. Words are so inadequate. I remember thinking that I should feel worried about hurtling along like this, and at the same time realizing that only my body could get hurt by an impact, and I had left it behind. It was a very quick journey. A light appeared up ahead. It was the end of the tunnel, and I rushed into it and out of the tunnel. There was no sensation of slowing down or coming to a stop. I was just there. I didn't even think to look back. I found myself in a beautiful place. In everyday terms, it was like a radiant, joyous landscape on a summer afternoon, but it was so much more. It was inexpressibly beautiful, serene, and delightful, with the most wonderful light pervading everything. Something like rolling hills with carpets of wildflowers. There were many other people there, and they were blissfully happy. I can't say how many. A multitude will have to do. I was doing so much more than just seeing this, I was feeling it all with senses unimaginable. Although I can't say who they were, I knew these people, these souls, and they knew me. They radiated love and welcome. They were like family, and we rejoiced in our reunion. It was rapturous. Although we didn't have physical bodies, we still looked the same, because we still had the same form as bodies. We could also see our real true selves. We communicated perfectly without speech. Then a radiant being of pure light appeared in the distance, and I watched as it moved slowly among us. As it came closer, I remember thinking that I would not have been able to look at it with my physical eyes. It was such an intense, beautiful white light. The light was 100 times, 1,000 times brighter than the sun. I was drawn irresistibly towards this being. I don't mean unwillingly. I wanted nothing else but to go to it, fall into it, and be embraced by it. As I came closer, I was overwhelmed by the feeling of pure love, understanding, and compassion, which emanated from this wondrous entity. This was by far the most wonderful and powerful feeling of my experience. Nothing can truly describe it. This glorious, wonderful entity recognized me, understood perfectly every minute aspect about me, and poured love into me. The love was real, as much a force as a feeling, and immeasurable. Knowing every little thing about me and my life and viewing it along with me, there was a lot of real amusement. This being has a personality. It is fun to be with, delightful, and it has a sense of humor. I never wanted to leave this divine presence, but somehow, without explanation, but with perfect understanding, I knew that I had to go back, and I understood that this was good and right. I woke up in my bed, in the dark, thoroughly blown away by what had just happened to me. I walked around the house declaring, that was no dream. It had been so real, that waking life that seemed like a dream for quite a while. About 2 years later, I read about near-death experiences for the first time. I marveled at the accounts I read, I think in a Reader's Digest. Other people had had the same experience as me, and they were saying it was a near-death thing. That made sense, considering the drugs I had taken at the time, but I had never realized that perhaps I had nearly died. It had been the most joyful experience for me, with no negative aspects whatsoever.